was humiliated at my sister's wedding, ignored, laughed at, and left sitting alone. But I never expected her husband's friend to be the one who stood up for me. I never imagined my sister's wedding would be the day I'd feel the loneliest I had ever been. From the moment I arrived at the Grand Hotel where the ceremony was being held, I felt the chill in the air that had nothing to do with the temperature. Everyone else seemed to glow, guests in shimmering dresses, men in crisp suits, champagne glasses clinking. But I felt like a shadow standing in the corner of someone else's fairy tale. My mother's eyes scanned me with quiet disappointment as if she regretted that I even showed up. "You could have tried a little harder with your look," she whispered, straightening my sleeve with forced politeness before walking away to greet the other guests. My father didn't say much either. He simply gave me a brief nod, his attention already drifting toward the photographers and relatives who mattered more in their world. And then there was my sister, the bride, elegant, radiant, every inch the center of attention she always wanted to be. When she saw me at the entrance, her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, you made it," she said softly, the way someone might acknowledge a stranger they didn't expect to attend. Her words stung more than she could ever know. I had spent the past 2 weeks saving up just to afford a simple lavender dress and a pair of heels that didn't hurt too much. But standing next to her designer gown, her diamond tiara, and her perfect makeup, I may as well have been invisible. The ceremony itself was beautiful, or at least that's what everyone said. I barely heard the vows, barely noticed the laughter. I sat alone on the last pew, behind a row of relatives who didn't even turn around to see me. Every time my sister's name was mentioned, the crowd smiled and clapped. When mine came up, it was only because the officiant listed the family members in attendance, and even then, no one looked my way. I told myself it didn't matter, that I wasn't here for recognition, but for support. Yet the truth was, a small part of me hoped my family would finally see me as more than just the lesser daughter, the one who didn't marry rich, didn't have the glamorous job, didn't make them proud enough to boast about at gatherings. When the ceremony ended and the reception began, my hopes faded quickly. The seating chart was displayed elegantly on a gold stand, names written in flowing script. I scanned for mine and found it near the bottom, table 14. The farthest table, near the catering section, is half hidden behind a decorative column. My heart sank when I realized that everyone else in the family sat together near the dance floor. My mother was laughing with relatives, my father raising toasts with the groom's family, and my sister surrounded by friends and photographers. I sat down quietly at my lonely table, trying to smile as waiters brushed past me carrying trays of wine glasses. Around me, a few distant cousins whispered among themselves, their glances sharp and assessing. One of them leaned toward another and muttered something that made them both snicker. I pretended not to notice, staring into my glass of water, feeling the weight of isolation pressing down on me. When dinner was served, the humiliation only deepened. Every table received bottles of fine wine, except mine. Every table had guests chatting, laughing, taking pictures, except mine. The lights from the chandeliers flickered softly above, illuminating every shimmer of joy I wasn't part of. I excused myself and walked toward the restroom, needing a moment to breathe. As I passed, I overheard one of my sister's bridesmaids say, "She looks so out of place, doesn't she? Like she just came for the free food." The others laughed, their giggles echoing through the hallway. My steps faltered. I pressed my lips together and walked faster, pretending I didn't care, but my chest ached. Inside the restroom, I stared at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes looked dull, my mascara slightly smudged, my smile forced. "You're fine," I whispered to myself, but even that sounded like a lie. By the time I returned to my table, the room had grown louder. The music was upbeat, the guests slightly tipsy. My sister was dancing with her new husband, glowing with happiness. My parents stood nearby, proud and radiant, basking in borrowed glory. I tried to clap, but my hands felt heavy. Suddenly, one of the groomsmen, a tall man with too much confidence and too little kindness, pointed at me and said loudly, "Hey, isn't that the sister who didn't even bring a date?" Guess some people really do just show up for the buffet. His friends burst into laughter. Even my parents smiled awkwardly, pretending it was harmless fun. My sister looked away, pretending she didn't hear. I felt the laughter ripple through the room like a wave, burning my skin. My throat tightened. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to scream. But I did neither. I just sat there, frozen, my nails digging into my palms to stop myself from crying. And then, through the noise and laughter, came a voice, steady, deep, and calm. That's enough. The room quieted slightly as the same groomsman turned toward the sound. A man stood near the table, one of my brother-in-law's friends, someone I hadn't even noticed before. He wasn't flashy or loud, but something was commanding about his presence. His gaze was unwavering as he looked straight at the man who had mocked me. "You don't talk to a lady like that. Apologize." His tone was low but firm, the kind of voice that made people listen. The laughter died immediately. The groomsman stammered, I was just joking, man." But the other man didn't blink. "Then your jokes need work," he said evenly. "Say sorry." The groomsman muttered an apology and sank into his seat, red-faced. I sat there, stunned. No one had ever defended me like that before. Not my parents, not my friends, not even my sister. The man, Daniel, I later learned, glanced at me briefly, his expression softening. "Don't let them get to you," he said quietly before walking away to rejoin his group. My heart thudded painfully in my chest, not from attraction, but from shock, because for the first time that night someone had seen me. After that moment, the energy of the room felt different. Not for everyone else, but for me. I wasn't invisible anymore. Not because I suddenly mattered to my family, but because someone had acknowledged the cruelty I'd endured for years. I stayed seated for a while, trying to process it. The laughter returned eventually, the music swelled, and people resumed dancing, but I couldn't stop replaying that moment in my head. The way Daniel's voice had cut through the noise, the quiet respect in his eyes, it was so unfamiliar, so disarming. As the night went on, I tried to avoid attention. I stayed near the edges of the hall, sipping juice instead of champagne, watching the happy chaos unfold. My sister tossed her bouquet, my parents beamed for photos, and the dance floor filled with laughter. But underneath it all, I felt something stir inside me, a mixture of pain, gratitude, and awakening. It wasn't just about that one man's defense. It was about realizing how little I had demanded from life, how accustomed I'd become to being treated as less. When the event started winding down, I stood outside on the terrace, away from the noise. The air was cool and the city lights shimmered below. I could still hear the music faintly from inside, the muffled laughter. I took a deep breath and looked up at the sky. For the first time in years, I let the tears fall freely. They weren't tears of weakness, they were of release. Every insult, every rejection, every moment of being overlooked by my own family suddenly felt like weights I was ready to set down. Behind me, I heard footsteps. I turned, and there was Daniel again, holding a glass of water. "You look like you needed this," he said softly, handing it to me. I smiled faintly, accepting it with a quiet, "Thank you." He leaned against the railing beside me, looking out at the lights. "Weddings bring out the best and worst in people," he said after a pause. "But you held your head high. That's more than most can do." His words were simple, but they carried warmth, the kind of kindness that didn't demand anything in return. We stood there for a moment, silent but comfortable, two strangers connected by an unspoken understanding. When I finally left the wedding that night, I didn't say goodbye to my family. I didn't wait for validation or acknowledgement. As I walked out of the grand hall, I realized something I should have known long ago. I didn't need their approval to have worth. And though I didn't yet know it, that night, the night I was humiliated, defended, and quietly seen, would be the start of a story I never expected to live. The morning after my sister's wedding, I woke up feeling heavy, like all the laughter and music from the night before had been nothing but a cruel echo meant to remind me how little I belonged. My phone buzzed with pictures posted by relatives. Smiling faces, champagne toasts, captions like, "A perfect night with family." Not one of those photos included me. I scrolled until my stomach turned, then tossed my phone aside. I promised myself I wouldn't cry again, but the silence in my tiny apartment was deafening. Then a message popped up from an unknown number. "Hey, it's Daniel. I hope you got home safely." For a moment, I just stared at the screen, uncertain whether to reply. No one ever followed up with me after family events. I typed a simple, "Yes, thank you. I appreciate what you did last night." Within seconds, he responded, "You didn't deserve that." Some people confuse cruelty with humor. Something about those words reached into the quiet corner of my heart that still believed in kindness. Over the next few days, Daniel and I exchanged messages, short at first, then longer. He wasn't overly charming or flirtatious, just thoughtful in a way I wasn't used to. He asked about my work at the small bookstore where I was employed, about the kind of books I liked, and about why I had chosen to live so far from my family. I told him the truth. That distance was the only thing that made me feel like I could breathe. When he laughed at my sarcastic jokes about life and family politics, it didn't feel forced. I found myself smiling at my phone, something I hadn't done in a long time. It felt strange but comforting to be seen, to be asked questions that weren't meant to judge or belittle. For the first time in years, I began to look forward to something. A week later, Daniel asked if we could meet for coffee. My heart pounded as I stared at the message. Part of me hesitated, knowing how my family would twist it if they found out. But the larger part of me, the part that remembered how he stood up for me when no one else did, said yes. We met at a quiet cafe tucked away near the river, the kind of place where time seemed to move more slowly. He was already there when I arrived, dressed simply in a dark jacket, his expression lighting up when he saw me. "You came," he said warmly, standing to greet me. "Of course," I replied, trying to hide how nervous I was. Our conversation flowed easily. He listened, truly listened, as I spoke about my dreams of opening my own bookshop someday. When I asked about his life, he told me he was an architect, that he valued structure, beauty, and detail, things people often overlooked but that defined everything he did. The way he spoke wasn't boastful. It was grounded, steady, much like him. For the first time, I felt like someone was speaking to me, not at me. When we left the cafe, he walked me to the bus stop, the cold evening breeze brushing against my face. "Your family doesn't know how lucky they are," he said quietly. The words caught me off guard. "They don't see what I see," he added before I could respond. I didn't know what to say, so I just smiled. A soft, grateful smile that said more than words could. That night I couldn't sleep. I replayed our conversation, the way his eyes held sincerity without pity, the way he saw me as a person instead of a problem. But word travels fast in families that thrive on gossip. Within days, my mother called. "I heard you've been meeting with Daniel," she said, her tone laced with accusation. "He's your sister's husband's friend. People will talk." My stomach tightened. "We're just friends," I replied, but she scoffed. "You've always been desperate for attention. Don't embarrass us further." I hung up before she could continue, but her words lingered like smoke. I knew she would tell my sister, and I dreaded what would come next. Sure enough, a few hours later, my sister texted, "Stay away from Daniel. He's part of my husband's circle, not yours." The audacity made my hands tremble. I had done nothing wrong, yet once again I was being painted as the villain in their story. That weekend, I ran into Daniel again, this time by coincidence. He was walking out of a bookstore downtown as I was walking in. His face brightened when he saw me. "Hey, what are the odds?" he said. I tried to smile, but my mind was still echoing my family's harsh words. He must have sensed it because his expression softened. "You look troubled," he said gently. I hesitated, then sighed. "My family they think I'm trying to steal attention. Or worse." Daniel's brow furrowed. "Because of me?" I nodded slightly. He shook his head, his jaw tightening. "That's ridiculous. You did nothing wrong." His certainty made something inside me break. I hadn't realized how much I needed someone to say those words out loud. Later that evening, he invited me to a small art exhibition his firm was hosting. I wanted to decline, afraid of what people might say, but something inside whispered, "Go!" The gallery was beautiful, soft lighting, intricate models of buildings, quiet conversations floating through the air. Daniel introduced me to a few of his colleagues, never once treating me like I didn't belong. For once, I wasn't the outcast. I was simply part of the moment. When I thanked him afterward, he smiled. "You belong anywhere you decide to stand," he said. That sentence replayed in my head for days, but happiness in my life never lasted long. My sister found out I had attended the event. She called me the next morning, her voice dripping with venom. "You really can't stand me being happy, can you?" She hissed. "You just had to insert yourself into my husband's world." I tried to explain, to tell her she was misunderstanding everything, but she cut me off. "Don't play innocent, Lucy. You've always envied me." Her words twisted deep inside me, reopening every old wound. "You know what?" I said quietly. "Maybe I did envy you once, but not anymore." I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking, but for the first time I didn't feel weak. A few days later, my parents invited me over, saying they wanted to talk things out. I should have known better. When I arrived, they were waiting in the living room with my sister already seated, her arms crossed. The air was thick with judgment. My mother started, "Your sister tells us you've been behaving inappropriately with Daniel." My chest tightened. "That's not true," I said firmly. "We're friends." "Nothing more," my sister scoffed. "You're lying. Everyone saw how you were clinging to him." I looked at my parents, searching for any trace of belief in their eyes, but found none. "You've embarrassed this family enough," my father said coldly. "We raised you better than this." My throat burned as I tried to speak. "You raised me to stay silent while you all trampled over me," I whispered. "I'm done doing that." Then I stood up, grabbed my coat, and walked out. No one called after me. That night I cried, not from guilt, but from exhaustion. Every time I tried to build something good, my family found a way to destroy it. I decided then that I wouldn't let them anymore. When Daniel called later, concerned after hearing about the confrontation, I told him everything. He listened quietly, then said, "You don't owe them your peace. People who love you don't make you prove your worth." His words settled into my heart like a seed finding soil. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into work, staying late at the bookstore, organizing events, anything to keep my mind busy. Daniel checked in often, short texts, little calls, but I kept some distance, afraid my presence would cause him trouble with my sister's circle. Then one evening after closing, I stepped outside to find him waiting near the curb. "You've been avoiding me," he said gently. "Not avoiding," I replied softly, "just protecting you from the mess that follows me." He smiled faintly. "You don't scare me, Lucy, and your family doesn't either." The sincerity in his voice made my eyes sting. We walked along the river that night, the city lights reflecting off the water. I told him about my childhood, the endless comparisons, the favoritism, the way I learned to shrink myself just to survive. He didn't interrupt. He didn't judge. When I finished, he said, "You've carried their shadows long enough. It's time to stand in your own light." I'll never forget those words. But as if the universe couldn't stand seeing me happy, my sister struck again. At a family brunch a week later, she cornered me in front of relatives and said loudly, "So are you still chasing Daniel? Maybe you'll get lucky and be someone's second choice." Laughter rippled around the table. My mother smirked and my father looked away. I felt the familiar sting in my chest. But this time, before I could even react, Daniel, who had been standing nearby talking to another guest, stepped forward. "Enough," he said, his voice calm but commanding. The entire room went silent. "You've mocked her for years, and yet she's the only one here with any grace." My sister's face turned pale. My mother's mouth opened, but no words came. Daniel turned to me and extended his hand. "Come on," he said softly. I took it, and together we walked out, leaving the stunned silence behind us. That night, sitting beside him in the car, I realized something profound. It wasn't about being rescued or defended. It was about finally having someone who saw me, who valued my quiet strength when everyone else dismissed it. As we drove through the empty streets, I looked out the window and whispered, "Thank you." Daniel glanced at me and smiled. "Don't thank me for seeing what's already there," he said. And for the first time in my life, I felt seen, not as the outcast or the disappointment, but as someone worth standing up for. Months slipped into seasons, and the ache that once followed me like a shadow began to fade as I poured every ounce of myself into rebuilding the life my family had broken. I quit the bookstore where I'd spent years hiding behind other people's words and decided to chase a dream of my own, a small business that sold secondhand books, handwritten journals, and personalized gifts. It started humbly, with a few shelves in a rented corner of a cafe, but it was mine. I called it the quiet page, because that was what I had always been. The quiet one, waiting for her own story to begin. The days were long and uncertain. I often worked past midnight, labeling items, sketching ideas, managing deliveries, and struggling to make rent. But for the first time, I wasn't living for anyone's approval. Each customer who smiled, each sale I made, felt like a small victory carved out of the rejection I had once endured. Daniel kept his promise to stay in touch. Sometimes he'd stop by after work, offering to carry boxes or fix a shelf that leaned too much to the left. Other times, he'd bring coffee and simply sit with me in the stillness of the shop, telling me about his projects, listening to my plans. He never tried to take over or advise unless I asked. He just believed in me. That belief, quiet but unwavering, became the foundation I built my strength on. Over time, word spread about my little store. A local journalist came by one afternoon, intrigued by the hand-bound journals I made from recycled paper. She wrote an article titled, "The Woman Who Turned Rejection into Renewal." Within a week, orders started pouring in online. I remember standing behind the counter, tears of disbelief in my eyes, as strangers sent messages saying my story inspired them. One even wrote, "You made me believe that silence can be powerful." It was surreal. A year after being treated like a ghost at my sister's wedding, I was being recognized for something I had created with my own hands. When the magazine featuring my story landed on stands, my phone rang with a number I hadn't saved but could never forget, my mother's. Her tone was cheerful, falsely so, like someone calling an old friend after a misunderstanding instead of a mother who had cast her daughter aside. "Lucy, we saw the article." "We're so proud of you," she said, her voice dripping with a mixture of surprise and forced warmth. My chest tightened, not with joy, but with the kind of calm that comes from knowing you no longer need what you once begged for. "Thank you," I said simply, and that was all. After that, they started reaching out more often. Small gestures cloaked in guilt. My father sent a text saying, "We always knew you'd make something of yourself." My sister, who hadn't spoken to me since the day she accused me of stealing attention, left a comment under the magazine's online post, "So proud of my sister." The hypocrisy might have angered me once, but now it only made me smile. Because for the first time I didn't need their validation. Their words couldn't rewrite the years they had erased me. Daniel saw all of this unfold quietly, never pushing, never gloating, just offering the same steady presence he always had. "Success changes people," I said to him one evening as we closed up the shop together. "It's changing how they see me." He looked at me and replied softly, "No, Lucy. It's not success changing them. It's you showing them they can't define you anymore." That sentence stayed with me like a mantra. Then came the invitation I never expected. My sister and her husband were hosting their first wedding anniversary celebration at the same grand hotel where everything had once fallen apart for me. The message read, "We'd love for you to come." It would mean a lot. For a moment, I almost laughed. The last time I walked into that place, I had left in tears, stripped of dignity and belonging. But now I wasn't the same woman. I had built something of my own. I had found my voice. Still, part of me hesitated. Old wounds have long memories. When I showed Daniel the invitation, he simply said, "You don't owe them anything, but if you go for yourself, not for them." I nodded slowly. "Then I'll go," I said. "But this time, I'll walk in with my head held high." The evening of the anniversary arrived with the golden glow of a setting sun spilling across the city skyline. I wore a simple black dress, elegant, understated, nothing like the designer gowns my family adored. Daniel arrived to pick me up, dressed in a charcoal suit, his smile easy and reassuring. "Ready?" he asked. I took a deep breath. More than ever. As we stepped into the hotel ballroom, the air felt charged with déjà vu. The same chandeliers sparkled above, the same music drifted through the hall, and the same people turned to stare. Only this time, their whispers weren't about pity, they were about curiosity. I could see it in their faces, recognition, surprise, even a flicker of respect. My sister approached, her smile practiced but her eyes uncertain. "Lucy, you came," she said. "Of course," I replied calmly. "Family occasion, right?" Her husband greeted Daniel with a firm handshake, clearly unaware of the quiet tension simmering beneath the polite exchange. As the night went on, I noticed my parents across the room, watching me with forced pride, as if claiming credit for a daughter they had once dismissed. Old habits die hard. My mother eventually approached me, her tone sugary. "You look lovely, dear." "That dress suits you." I smiled faintly. "Thank you." "It's from a local designer, someone who believed in me when others didn't." The flicker in her eyes told me she caught the message. Then came the subtle jabs, the familiar undercurrent of belittlement disguised as conversation. My aunt whispered loudly, "Oh, Lucy, you finally made something of yourself. Took a while, didn't it?" My father chuckled politely, as if it were harmless humor. My sister's friends smirked, one of them muttering something about sympathy success. My hand clenched around my glass, but before I could respond, Daniel stepped forward. His voice, calm yet firm, carried across the table. "You should be ashamed," he said, his gaze sweeping over them. "You talk about her like you built her, but all you ever did was tear her down. She did everything on her own, without your help, without your support." The silence that followed was deafening. My father looked stunned, my mother's lips parted, and my sister's cheeks flushed crimson. I felt my heart race, not from fear but from vindication. For once, someone had spoken the truth aloud, and there was no taking it back. After a long pause, my sister cleared her throat and tried to regain composure. "We're just teasing," she said weakly, forcing a laugh. "You know how families are." Daniel's gaze didn't waver. "No," he replied. "I know how decent people behave, and this isn't it." The tension in the air was thick, but I didn't step in to diffuse it. I let it burn because for the first time it wasn't me being humiliated. It was them being exposed. The rest of the dinner passed in awkward silence. Guests who had once joined in mocking me now looked away, pretending they hadn't heard. The balance of power had quietly shifted. I wasn't the wounded sister anymore. I was the woman who had built herself from ashes while they had stayed stagnant, hiding behind appearances. Later that night, as I stepped outside to catch some air, my sister followed me. The laughter and music inside felt distant now. She stood a few feet away, arms crossed, eyes glistening, not with anger, but something that looked almost like regret. "You've changed," she said softly. I turned toward her, the cool night breeze brushing my hair back. "No," I said evenly. "I just stopped trying to please people who never saw my worth." She looked down, silent for a long moment. "I didn't mean for things to get so ugly," she murmured. "You were always different." I guess I didn't know how to handle that. I studied her face, the sister who had once laughed while I was mocked, who had turned love into competition. And yet, in that moment, I didn't feel hatred anymore, only distance. "You don't have to handle me," I said quietly. "You just have to stop hurting me." She nodded faintly, her eyes wet, but said nothing more. Inside, Daniel waited near the door, hands in his pockets, watching me with that same quiet understanding. When I walked up to him, he offered his hand, not out of pity, but out of partnership. I took it without hesitation. As we walked past the grand hall where I had once sat alone, I caught sight of our reflection in the glass doors. Two figures standing side by side, equal, strong, free. The whispers followed us, but this time they weren't of ridicule. They were filled with wonder, maybe even respect. Outside, the night was calm. The city lights shimmered like distant promises, and for the first time, I didn't feel like an outcast looking in. I felt whole. "You okay?" Daniel asked softly. I smiled. "More than okay?" He squeezed my hand. "Good," he said. "Because the woman I met at that wedding deserves the world, and she finally looks like she knows it." His words sank deep into me, healing wounds I hadn't realized were still open. I looked up at the sky, the same one that had witnessed my humiliation a year ago, and whispered, "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did." As we drove away from the glittering hall, I didn't glance back once. I didn't need to. That chapter of my life had closed the moment I stopped asking to be included. My revenge wasn't loud or cruel. It was my peace, my independence, my quiet success. I had risen from the ashes of their rejection and built something stronger than validation, self-worth. And as the city lights faded behind us, I knew that the outcast who once cried alone at her sister's wedding was gone forever. What remained was a woman who finally understood that sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply becoming everything they said you never could.